it's very bright. So, we're delighted to be presenting Boy Erased here this evening in the presence of the director. Before we have him on, maybe we can just remind you of some of his credits. You will have seen him as an actor in Animal Kingdom, which is a wonderful 2015 psychological thriller, which he also directed. Loving, of course, and before that, Star Wars Episode 2 and 3. So, would you please give a warm welcome to Joel Edgerton.
Chance to speak. Thank you for having me and the film here. I'm very excited. I actually shot a movie here, oh gosh, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I stayed down near Granville Island. I went down there and I ate a couple of lobsters and it was pretty good. So I'm very happy to be back. And of course, you're about to see, I don't know if you know much about the film, but there's a couple of very dear, now friends of mine who are Canadian, Xavier Dolan, who is almost too prolific. Who I met originally to perhaps work with him as an actor, and I flipped the switch and I made him come to work with me as an actor. And I love him, and a beautiful actor by the name of Theodore Pellerin, who I believe is he's an angel, and I believe is in at least one other film in the festival. This film is an incredible, I'd say labour of love, but I'd actually go beyond that and say an obsession. I read the memoir of Gary Conley maybe only a year and a half or 2 years ago, and every day since then I was working towards turning that memoir into a film and trying to do it respectfully. So I'm coming back afterwards to do a Q&A, so I don't believe in talking too much before a movie. But I really appreciate being here, and I look forward to answering questions and sharing my thoughts about it afterwards. So thank you.
Joel, you directed, you starred in the film, you wrote the screenplay. So, can you please tell us about your own process in getting started on this?
Is that all right? Yeah. I read... No. Oh. I read Garrett's memoir because Kerry Roberts, who is the producer of the film, was in a state of wondering about America and you know, just post-Trump's election. Was actually, strangely for holiday reading, looking for subject matter that wouldn't take her mind off that, would actually throw wood on the fire of how she felt about the country at the time, and came across a little word about Garrett's memoir, and knowing that word on the street was that the vice president was kind of not against and maybe very, very much for conversion therapy, dove into it. She, like me, as soon as she read the book, was very hooked by it. I picked it up because she'd said I should read it, and I'm very fascinated by institutions. I have been since I was a child. The fear of being locked up against my will. Thank God I haven't, which is why I don't commit crimes. But cults, prisons, mental institutions, I went into it for that reason, and what I came out of was this incredible family story where there were kind of there was heroes, but there was no villains. There was just a bunch of people who, kind of in their own way, based on their beliefs, thought they were doing the right thing. And that right thing just seemed to me to be incredibly ironic, because what Garrett went through, the author of the book, was something that I thought didn't need to happen. And, you know, I said it actually the other festival in Canada, when we premiered the film there, that I hope this film is kind of redundant in a year's time or a few years' time. And so I became very obsessed with the book and the story, and it really didn't stop. And I think every day since then, until I finally took a holiday last week, that every day I was working towards making the film. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what's so rich about it, that the characters are so nuanced, and, you know, so many films are black and white and, you know, polemical and on point, but this film just has so much subtlety and richness and development, so bravo. Can we take questions now? Do we have time to think about them? Yes, please, we'll start here.
Yeah, you talked about the casting we're doing.
Well, I found Lucas actually, strangely, because he was the son of a man that I was working with as a director, Peter Hedges, who also has directed Lucas in a film this year. Peter and I were working together, and along comes Lucas every weekend to visit his dad, and we're playing basketball together. And strangely, that year, the end of that shoot, which was I think 2012 in Atlanta, where we also shot this, Lucas got his first acting job in Moonrise Kingdom. And I wrote him a letter saying congratulations, and you know, it's really cool and exciting, and I wish you well, and I wrote a little PS at the end saying, do not grow up and steal my acting jobs. So I call this like keeping my enemies close. Because I knew him, and I just like watched Manchester by the Sea for the second time. There's just to be very kind of brief, if I can, about it, there's a few elements about Garrett as a real person that I wanted to capture and find in an actor. One was that in that point in his life, he was very much kind of a person sailing on the wind of everybody else's agenda. It was very difficult as a central character. He's been spoken to, preached at, yelled at, and he's just soaked to all that stuff. And it's not until later in the film that it builds up his own voice, and I needed an actor who could hold that presence on screen with stillness and very little words. I also needed somebody who was sort of still part boy and becoming a man, which he very much was at that time. And also someone who was very much an every person. And like Garrett in real life, he was a boy who, he was not a jock, he wasn't super effeminate. He managed to get through, you know, as he calls sort of passing, you know, until college when he was outed. And there was something about Lucas as a person who was very much an everyman, very much like a blank canvas that you could project whatever you wanted onto. That I knew him was just a bonus, but I also knew him maybe more than I think people think that I went to Nicole and Russell because I've got there's 6 phone numbers in Australia and you just call me. And I knew them less than I knew Lucas.
On that Australian connection, were there other actors or other people involved who are in fact Australian?
Troy Sivan. There's obviously a couple of people. Yeah. I have to credit Carmen Cuba, my wonderful casting director. I've worked with her on a couple of projects. Casting directors are so great at making directors think outside the box. I started to think that she just spent all of her spare time going to music events because she was like, here's Troy Sivan. I was like, oh, I thought he was a musician. But she got him to read for me, and I was like, wow, he's really amazing. And Flea, this is why I talk about the music thing. It's like, Flea, no, so are you a casting director or do you just go to concerts all the time? And Theodore Pellerin was thanks to her. So many of these great sort of other supporting cast. You know, Flea actually was born in Melbourne, so it starts to become very much Australia there. But Russell and Nicole, I simply cast because you see the photos at the end, there's something about Russell I spent the weekend early in the process. David, my co-producer, who plays Michael in the film, one of the what I call the blue shirts. He's also, by the way, running a podcast with Garrett that's releasing concurrently with the film that gives an even deeper examination into the history of conversion therapy, which you must check out. David, Lucas, and Garrett and I went to Arkansas, had dinner with Herschel and Martha, who are the real parents. We were very much welcomed into their home. We attended church with them. I went to Texas to meet, it's okay to say this after the film, I went to meet John Schmidt, who my character is based on, had lunch with him and his husband, and really kind of dove into that aspect. But Russell and Nicole just seemed like the people that came to mind when I met the family, when I poured through the family album. So I wasn't trying to, be patriotic.
Any other questions?
Can you talk about, I thought the film was great. It's unfortunate that it's so relevant, even just what happened this morning in the States. Can you talk about the other research you did involved for just conversion therapy? To be
Praise the film, and can you talk a little bit about the research?
Yeah, there's something interesting, when I was looking at making the film, I was, one of the references to me was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was a film that I thought the inmates kind of necessarily deserved to be there, given the practices at that time. That book was written, Cuckoo's Nest was written 6 years before the abolition of lobotomy as a practice in the United States, but the film was made 6 years after the banning of that. We're at a stage where we've made the film when it's very much still a conversation. I know that Vancouver can be very proud that as a region that it first placed the ban conversion therapy in Canada. I think Nova Scotia's second. We were talking about this backstage. The whole prospect of the practice is so insane to me. But diving into, researching the film, I first of all went to Garrett. He was, oftentimes you make a true story and the people involved are all passed on. This is very much still alive. It's 2004, but you may as well say it's also 2018. Garrett introduced me to other survivors of conversion therapy. He gave me access to his therapist who had reached out to him via Facebook, which is the character I play. Speaking to the parents was very important. And as you're talking about, not rendering anybody as a villain. It was very much a lure to go, okay, it's a movie, I grew a mustache, why shouldn't I twirl it? It's a really good question, actually, and maybe it would make us more money, pardon me, but I think that the conversation is more lasting and more relevant if we render that story more honestly. And I don't think that anybody wakes up in the morning and goes, all right, I'm going to destroy the lives of some children. John Schmidt, who's the character, the man that I based my character on, he was dealing with his own sexuality in a way to push his own things down, his own feelings down, his own sense of self. He was trying to remind himself that he was on the right path. And in order to do that, he was affecting the families, not just children, but the families of those children, thousands of people, thinking he was trying to help, whether that was to help himself or others. The family were treating their children like they were addicted to heroin. Because if you're given the option that this is just a choice, like drugs are, don't you think that you're thinking you're trying to help somebody? So to me, that's almost more terrifying. The idea that the people that are there are going, hey, listen, we're going to have a wonderful time together. We're going to get closer to Jesus. We're going to help you get back on the right path, because there's no arguing with enthusiasm and conviction and true belief, So it was important for us to not create an easy world of heroes and villains, to actually treat everybody with respect. And I think that what's important is that all we do is shine the light on what's going on, let everybody know it's really happening, make everybody go, holy shit. Because what I call the earmuffs of America, which are you know, the East Coast and the West Coast, they're often deaf to what's happening in the middle, which is where the majority of that stuff is happening. And I'm sure it's the same here, it's the same in Australia. Whatever you call Middle America, it has its own version everywhere in the world.
Any other questions? Here, please.
I'm curious if you've seen the film with different audiences and what your take is on different reactions to various scenes from different people. Because I've noticed like a lot of laughter. I was wondering if you were expecting that.
So have you seen it with few audiences and how different have their reactions been?
You guys are by far the best. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, well, I've seen the film with a handful of audiences. You know, here's the problem also is that I've seen the film maybe 1,000 times in various incarnations through the editing process. There's definitely meant to be humour in it. I mean, you know, it's humour of a certain nature. You know, I'm also very cognizant as we were getting closer to wrapping the film up and locking it off to make sure that there was laughter that came at the right places. I can't say with every audience that's always the case, that we've totally covered all those bases, but it's important for me to let the gas out of the valve every now and then to allow people to also enjoy the irony, and particularly that comes through Nicole's character. But yeah, I mean, to make a film completely devoid of irony or sarcasm or any sense of humour, to me, may be too oppressive considering the subject matter. On that note, there's also, you know, as we're talking about the twirling of the moustache, this need to make sure that we don't paint the wrong picture of a particular therapy that Lucas's character went through. There's definitely what I call like barbed wire facilities. There's definitely hands shoved in buckets of ice while watching, you know, the wrong kind of male iconography, like torture. That wasn't Lucas's experience, Lucas's character's experience, Garrett's experience. For me, Garrett's experience allowed for a story that had a redemptive, positive potential ending, even if it's open-ended, that there was love at the basis of the choices made for everybody. It wasn't just people like therapists profiteering and waving the parents off at the gate and then beating children. It wasn't born out of hate. It was just born out of miscommunicated and misaligned ideas.
Final question? Let's go here in the center.
Is there a reason why you chose to go with a non-linear fashion for the film?
Yeah, if you read the book, if anybody's read the book, Garrett leaps all over the place. I mean, more frenetic than we do in the film. Something really struck me when I first picked up the book is very early on, I think it's literally the first chapter, the central character is emptying his pockets and being scrutinised about the contents of his phone, and it felt to me like he was entering prison, and I thought that was a very striking place to start the film. It's interesting because you don't get a sense of really who he is before that happens, yet there was something really kind of intriguing about that to me, that really... One thing I had to really lean back from is given my morbid curiosity about institution, is that the film didn't become all about the institution. As I was making the film, and I believe there's 3 phases to writing a film. One is writing the script, the second one is making the film, and the third one is cutting the film. And they're all as valid as each other. We all think that typing it on a computer is the holy, moment, but sometimes cutting it is more important, and I realised just how more valid and relatable the family story was than the story of the institution. So, the flashback or the non-linear structure of the film is born out of the book, and I wanted to retain a sense of honesty about that. I wanted to remain as kind of true to Garrett's book as I could, but I had to make sure that I didn't jump back too much, because it's very difficult to get a real beeline on a character sometimes if you're going too much back and forth.
You speak eloquently about this, and the film is just great. So thank you so much for being here. Comment, just so you know, if there are people you think should see this film, it's going to be released in a couple of weeks by Focus Features in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal.